Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about the solved murder of Rebecca Koster. I just wanted to give my normal disclaimer that I've gathered all the information off the internet and I don't mean any ill to anybody that I speak about today. I've just done this video for educational purposes. Rebecca, or Becky as she was more commonly known as, lived in Medford, Long Island in New York. She lived with her mother Barbara Ross and a stepfather Larry Ross. Rebecca was employed and she worked as a home healthcare aide to aid the elderly and people with autism. So this generally shows that she was quite a caring girl. This was during the day, but by night time she liked to go out, have fun, and party with all her friends, just like any other young girl would. She was a fun-loving, vivacious girl who just simply loved to go out and party. It was said that it made her feel so alive. She was bubbly, lively, and loved everyone and everything. Now, Rebecca was only 24 years old when she mysteriously went missing. It was on a Thursday, on the 3rd of December 2009, when Rebecca, along with her 28-year-old boyfriend Dan Mayer and her best friend Nicole Longo, along with some other friends, decided to go out and have a night out and enjoy themselves. The group went to 2 bars in Suffolk County, which was very close to where she lived in Medford. The second bar that she actually went to was called Butcher's Boys Bar and Grill, and this was located in Holbrook. Now, the group didn't end up staying there very long and they left around 3:20 a.m, I believe. So after leaving, the group all made their way home. And Dan dropped Rebecca off around about 3:30 a.m. He walked her to her door, made sure that she got in. And Barbara, her mother, like many mothers out there, would ask her to send her a text message to make sure that she's okay on her nights out generally. So that's what she did. Rebecca sent her mother a text message to say that she'd got home safe. Barbara was a nurse and she was on a night shift that night, so she'd messaged her to let her know that she was home okay. So the next morning, when Barbara had finished her shift and she returned home, everything was normal. Rebecca's car was in the driveway. Her belongings were inside where they should be, but when she went to actually check on Rebecca in her room, Rebecca wasn't there. She obviously tried to ring her and text her, but she didn't receive an answer. And it was when she didn't actually turn up for work that she started to really get worried. So she rang Dan, her boyfriend, and asked if he knew where she was. He told her the same story. I dropped her off at around 3:30. She went home as far as he was away, walked her to the door. He didn't actually know where she was. Because of this, they then reported her missing to the police. Obviously, they interviewed Dan, to which he told them the same story, and her family and friends began searching for her. They put up flyers, they even knocked on doors to see if anybody had seen or had any information with regards to Rebecca. So the police started looking into the case and they managed to look into the CCTV footage at the bars that they had attended that night. Nicole Longo, obviously Rebecca's best friend, had stated, "Yeah, we had a drink and a good time. She was fine, everything was fine." Basically, the groups were all drinking and just generally having fun. Nothing seemed to be untoward. Nicole actually left earlier than the rest of them and recalls Rebecca saying, "I'll talk to you later. See you later. I love you. Bye." Little did Nicole know that this would be the last time she would ever speak to or see her lifelong best friend ever again. When the police looked into the footage, they came across this mysterious man who sparked up a conversation with her as she was waiting to get a drink. Now, our family have actually watched this video, but it wasn't released to the public, so I can't show it to you guys. But I can tell you what went on in the video. So no one actually knew who this guy was. He was just randomly stood talking to Rebecca. And he did this for a little while, and then at one point he actually takes her phone and it appears that he's putting his own number in it. And then they carry on about the business. Just one day after Rebecca went missing, a Jane Doe was found murdered in a field when authorities responded to a brush fire. Meanwhile, Rebecca's family were actually receiving text messages from their daughter's phone. So the first message came around about 11:40 p.m. on the Sunday. This message basically stated that she was with Dan, she didn't know where she was, but he was kind of holding her captive in a sense. Of course, the police rushed over to Dan's to try and find her. And after all, he was the last person that saw her alive, so he could possibly have been the one that had taken her. But when they arrived, they actually found nothing. Larry actually stated that it was driving the family crazy, which obviously it would do. They were so elated when they thought that they might find her, and then they didn't. So it was kind of dangling the hope in front of them. It was there momentarily, and then when they got there, she wasn't there, so it was ripped away from them. This evil game did not end there, however, and you will find out what I mean by that statement later on in the video. So on Monday, Barbara received another message from her daughter's phone. It stated, Dan had her tied up in his basement, and don't tell Dan or he'll kill me. This time, the police were a little bit more ready. They managed to trace the pings and try to narrow down the area in which the text messages were coming from. Because again, they knew it wasn't Dan's house. They'd been there, they'd checked it all, she wasn't there. It actually appeared that the messages were coming from an industrial estate which was about 20 miles from Medford. Her family had obviously wondered if Dan had anything to do with her disappearance. She hadn't really been in the relationship with him that long. I think it had only been a few months at this point, and she didn't really know him all that well. They thought that maybe his motive would have been jealousy. Had he seen Rebecca talking to that guy the night of her disappearance? Regardless, they were hoping that she would be found safe and sound somewhere, especially with these texts going on. It gave them a little bit of hope that she was still alive, and that maybe they would find her safe and well. It wasn't until 4 p.m. on the Wednesday that they did discover that the Jane Doe that they had found was actually Rebecca Koster. They notified her family, and obviously the news absolutely devastated Barbara and her family. She actually said that the idea that somebody had actually got her daughter's phone and was using it to taunt her made her loss even more unbearable. She said it was torture, and I just can't even comprehend that somebody would do something like that. On the 4th of December 2009, a motorist found the remains at about 7:20 p.m. in a field near the intersection at Jeremy Hill Road and Route 201 in North Stonington, Connecticut, a mere 85 miles away from Rebecca's home. And Rebecca had actually suffered a horrific and brutal death. She'd actually been stabbed to death with a fatal wound to her liver, and her body was so terribly mutilated and then burned beyond recognition. Cases like this are really heartbreaking. When you actually read into what has actually been done to her, it's so shocking. And it just makes you think that how could anyone do anything like that? Some people might find it disturbing what was actually done to her body, so I'm just letting you know now in case you don't want to know these details. But the killer had actually cut off parts of her face. So basically, anything that could be recognisable, they'd cut off her nose, her ears, as well as her fingertips, her toes, her hair. They even went as far as cutting off the tattoo she had on her back. And this was all to hide her identity after fatally stabbing her in the stomach. Obviously, after they did this, it wasn't sufficient for them. They decided that the remains needed to be burnt to get rid of any evidence, basically, to tie them back to him, or to even try and find out whose body this actually was. Barbara has actually been quoted saying that no human being could do something like that. That's a demon that does something like that. Due to the damage on the body and how badly mutilated she actually was, and obviously all of the identifying markers being removed and her body burnt, it took the investigators 6 days to actually learn who this Jane Doe was. And they did actually have to identify her by her dental records in the end. So this murderer had done everything in his power to try and hide the identity of this body. And during this time of uncertainty, her family was being tormented with texts, basically pretending that her daughter was still alive from this killer, when actually she wasn't. She had been dead for days at this point. For someone to do this, in my eyes, is just horrendous. So not only did this person sickeningly murder and mutilate her body, beyond recognition, I might add, that wasn't enough for them. They wanted to torment their family even more by making them believe, giving them the hope that she was still alive when she actually wasn't. He just basically gives them false hope, and I just can't understand that. Don't get me wrong, I can't understand anybody doing these kind of crimes anyway, but to then add on the text on top just is unbelievable. Obviously, the police conducted interviews and tried to find out any information with regards to Rebecca. Her last known whereabouts were captured on the security of the Butcher Boy Bar and Grill. She was last seen around about 3:20 a.m. standing next to a jukebox with her boyfriend on that Friday night. Larry said on the video you can see her standing next to the jukebox waiting to go home. He also said that he didn't know why this person, her killer, had his daughter's phone, was sending these text messages and actually trying to frame her boyfriend Dan for it. Now Larry did go round to Dan's and stated that he was crying and told him that he would never ever hurt Rebecca in a million years because he loved her. Despite the texts trying to frame Dan, and despite the fact that he was one of the last people to see her alive that night, the police quickly ruled him out of the investigation. They believed his story, and they ruled him out as a suspect. And in turn, Rebecca's phone actually turned out to be the key to this case. The police found that about an hour after Dan had dropped Rebecca off, she received 2 phone calls. One of these calls lasted 17 minutes, and obviously the police then had this number. Now these calls were made by a 33-year-old man called Evans Ganthia. Her family had no idea who he was, and neither did Rebecca for that fact. It turned out that Evans was actually the mystery man that she spoke to that night that he had given his number to. And obviously he rung Rebecca that night, and it seems like she put her trust in a stranger basically. The police did speak to Evans, and of course he denied any involvement, and they had to let him go because at the time they didn't have enough evidence. The police of course went on to get search warrants for his home and his car, which was an SUV. This is where they found blood in various parts in his car, his SUV. And although they did not actually find blood within the house, they found evidence that the garage had been recently cleaned. After this, he then admitted that yes, he did call her. He went to her house, he picked her up, he took her to his house. But when she got there, she apparently became ill. She started coughing. She started foaming at the mouth. This caused her to then fall, tripping over his dumbbells, and she hit her head and knocked herself unconscious. So, normally, someone you've literally only just met that night comes round to your house. They fall over, they knock themselves unconscious. What would you do? You'd ring an ambulance, you'd ring the police, you'd try and get them some help. Oh no, what he did was, upon discovering that she'd accidentally died, in a panic, and realising that he didn't want her body to be identified, he cut her up, wrapped her body parts in a blanket, put her head in a plastic bag. Then he drove his SUV with the remains in his trunk. He then got onto a car-carrying ferry near his home in Port Jefferson. He was actually seen on footage on this ferry, walking around, acting completely normal, like nothing was wrong, acting completely as though his car was not full of body parts. This ferry went to Connecticut, which is where he then laid out the remains and set them on fire. He then returned home like nothing had ever happened. So for a death that accidentally occurred in his house, he mutilated her body. He cut off her nose, her ears, her fingers, and then got onto a ferry, dumped her remains and set them on fire. I believe that his story is just that, a story. And so did the investigators. They actually believed that Rebecca was killed in his car. And this is simply because of the sheer amount of blood and where it was located. So basically under the seat and towards the centre console was a massive pool of blood. They had the evidence that they needed to charge Evans with Rebecca's murder when the forensics team came back with the tiniest piece that he didn't actually manage to erase. So they dusted the duct tape that was wrapped around Rebecca's body and they found a fingerprint. And you guessed it, that fingerprint matched up with Evans. As suspected, Evans carried on with this story, said that it was accidental death. The jury didn't believe him. Nobody really believed him. And he was found guilty of second-degree murder. He was given 25 years to life. The judge in this case, Justice Richard Ambrose, actually said that the accidental death story, and I quote, makes no sense. Neither I nor the jury believes you. The wickedness of this case is almost unspeakable. Within a matter of hours of meeting this vibrant young woman at a bar, Evans had stabbed her to death. And his evil plot didn't even end there. In an attempt to conceal that the remains were Rebecca's, he mutilated her with such brutality that it's almost impossible to imagine. And not even satisfied by that, he then set her on fire. To further his carnage, he then sent text messages to a worried, desperate family from the daughter's phone, giving them a flicker of hope that she was still alive, when all along she was not. I can only imagine how her family felt at this time. The hope that they had that she was still alive and that maybe they could get her back, when all along that Jane Doe that they had found one day after she had gone missing was actually Rebecca, and it was their daughter. It really does break my heart how evil and twisted people can be. And how he murdered and mutilated her body just goes to show how disturbed Evans was. Evans will actually be eligible for parole in 2035. And Rebecca's mother, Barbara, has stated that when that day comes, she will be right there. Her and her family, everyone will be there. And they're going to do everything in their power to try and stop him from ever walking the streets again. Now, Barbara has a warning for trusting young people out there like her daughter. And I wholeheartedly agree with this message. So, like I said, I quote this from Barbara. There are monsters out there and they look just like people. Becky trusted and she paid dearly for it. And if I could reach just one male or female and make them think twice about trusting someone they don't know, and that then saves their life, she didn't die in vain. And again, I wholeheartedly agree with this. And I hope maybe this video helps to spread the word and could potentially help those vulnerable people out there. Okay guys, that's all I have today on the brutal murder of Rebecca Koster. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, bye!